Heavenly Father, help us to do your will. Give us the strength to be courageous and not to fear to speak out. Give us the knowledge to see your vision and to work it to fruition. We thank you that we live in a free country and are safe to speak out in this group. In this we pray. Amen. There is a flag in the corner.
Okay, the flag is in the corner there by the stand. For those of us, there it is right there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'm allergic to New York State. No, I'm allergic to New York City.
Thank you. Okay, first off, I'd like to have everybody who's an officer please stand and up and raise your hand so everybody knows. Who they are, so if you have questions after the meeting, you can refer to one of us. At this point, I'd like to go to our treasurer, Craig, who's going to have a few remarks.
Question. Thanks. I said I'm allergic to New York City.
All right. My name's Craig. If you guys would like to help out, like volunteer or anything like that, feel free to come find one of us after the meeting. If you guys would like to contribute financially, you can do so on our website at Divide NY, and you can find that at .org or .com.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Jackson, and I'm the co-chair. I just came on board this year after my election in 2020, and I really felt that John and this organization was a real strong solution for New York State, because what I see is in the legislation that I had eyes all over was various groups fighting for different causes, whether it be our high taxes, whether it be for our Second Amendment rights, whether it be for our medical freedom. There's a vast majority of why we feel or led us to be here today. And what I'm trying to do now is take the groundwork that has been laid out over the past 8 years of this organization and put the fire in it. We have organized, we've brought on 2 new board members, Don Frank and Gary Dunlap, to help with this work. We have put this year in 2021 regional meetings together where we have gone to, starting in Central New York, we did a Western New York. We have also now covered here the Southern Tier, the Capital District, and we have Adirondacks and Ulster County, that area green. So we're covering the states, trying to get people acclimated where the information is readily available, but a lot of people don't know what to do. And so we're trying to really push the understanding that we're trying to get a home rule resolution passed. John is going to get into that with the slides that he'll read to you guys, go over in the packets that you have. But when you come away from this meeting today, what do? You can go onto our website, www.dividenewyork.com, and there is literally, you find your legislators. We're trying to pass this through in this way, in this manner, so that it helps the assembly. We have a trifecta in New York State where we have an assembly, Democrat senator, majority. So how can this happen? Where do we go with this? By passing these home rule resolutions, because we have an advantage of the Republican majorities that are across New York State. So even though we have a blue state, many county legislators are Republican majority held. So if we can organize and get this to happen, then it makes the Democrat assembly member or senator obliged to sponsor the bills that are there for us. So it can be done. I'm going to get into the details, the benefits, all of the nitty-gritty, but we're just trying to put the fire into letting you guys know that we can get this done, and we need people to simple as copy and paste, send those emails, get to a meeting like this, organize in your area, work with our area leaders that are here, and get it on the calendar for a legislative session. We'll come there and drive it home for you, because we really want this done as a solution to all of these things. And John will get into the details of how it will benefit most all of those. Those are just a few of the reasons, but he's going to get into all of the reasons as to why I'm fully supportive and committed to Divide New York. Thank you.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Divide New York, thank you so much. Thank you for letting me speak on this important topic. It will be on our ballot this November at several of your meetings now. It was great to see you in Troy and to see about your mission. As John mentioned, my name is George Phillips. I'm from not too far away from here in the town of Union, near Endicott. And the town of Union is named after two Revolutionary War armies that came together under General Washington's command to fight for freedom. So it's great to be here today to fight for freedom. We've lost so much freedom here in our state. Critical to freedom is free and fair elections. And I want to just take you back to the last election, what we saw in the news with the presidential election, and how that relates to what could be going on here in New York in the future. Absentee ballot voting was big. There were emergency orders because of COVID to extend absentee voting in most states from the normal nursing home, people who could not get to the polls physically for health reasons, those who are out of town, and those who are serving our country in the U.S. military, to anyone could vote absentee for any reason. That was the case here in New York as well. And you may remember the governor made another yet emergency order saying everyone could vote absentee. Everyone had a health reason with COVID. In the primary, the governor went so far as to mail everyone an absentee ballot request form, and it caused a lot of confusion. So we had a lot of absentee voting here in New York. Nationally, you know the scene. President Trump spoke up in August and said, look, we're going to have tens of millions of people vote before we even have a chance to debate at the end of September. Is that fair? Is that fair? So you talk about transparency with absentees, verifying identity, verifying signature, the possibility for fraud. Those are all very valid concerns. But again, by the time Donald Trump and Joe Biden debated at the end of September, tens of millions of people had voted in the election. And we heard the stories from different states, including Pennsylvania, not that far from here. We had judges changing absentee deadlines without the legislature. We had drop boxes where people could drop their absentee ballots off in those boxes. In the state of New Jersey, if you vote absentee in one election, the next election you automatically get a ballot sent to you. So think about that here in New York, and as difficult as things are here in New York, believe it or not, the liberals in New York City and Albany, to substantially permanently change election law, they have to change the New York State Constitution. They have to go through us to do that. So they were sued. New York State was sued for the emergency absentee order, and that was rescinded. And by the way, again, we want legitimate votes to count, but it was very interesting. I was working on a project that monitored 11 state Senate districts, mostly in upstate Long Island, ones that would be very important, I think, for this cause here. All of them were winning on election night, and then massive numbers of absentees came in, and all of a sudden most of them were losing. So just imagine the presidential, again, in this case, President Trump up everywhere, and then all of a sudden all of these absentee ballots that we hear the term harvest coming through here. Imagine that in a close governor's race. Imagine that in close races in your region for state, senate, assembly, for local office. That's what's at stake on the ballot. This sheet that I passed out to you, and what I was referencing, is proposal number 4. So it says authorizes the legislature to pass a law for no excuse absentee voting. Again, in our state of New York, do we want people voting absentee permanently for any reason? What's going to happen in New York City? What's transparency in elections. There are 5 initiatives on the ballot. I want to speak about the ones that relate to elections. After number 4, the no excuse absentee voting, which I hope you oppose. I can see from people's sign language and body language here, I hope you oppose, would also be number 3. Authorizes the legislature to pass a law for the same day voter registration. Think about your Board of Elections. Think about if you had a child or grandchild in your family or someone who moved in new to your town. When can they register to vote? Usually it's 30 days before the election here. That gives the Board of Elections time to mail a verification form to you, do some checking, make sure you are who you say you are. Imagine New York State, and namely New York City, same-day voter registration. Imagine our college towns. We're right here by Ithaca. College towns have always been a source of question here in terms of transparency in elections. So please, I hope you'll consider as well voting against proposal number 3, same-day voter registration. Is this going to help prevent fraud in our elections? No, it's not. Finally, we have one that's very complicated. I'll try to explain it quickly here, but it's proposal number 1, redistricting. In the old days in New York, you might remember this, it was Republicans in the state Senate, Democrats in the state Assembly. And according to the Constitution of the United States, every 10 years there's a census. And after the census, the states redraw the districts for state offices, also for U.S. Congress. In the old days in New York, the Republicans kind of took care of the state Senate districts. They said, let us draw those. Okay, you can draw those. The Assembly drew the Assembly districts. For Congress, they would horse trade. And among the things I've done in life, I've actually run for Congress. I ran in a crazy district that went from Ithaca through Binghamton, through parts of the Hudson Valley. It was had snakes and lines going all over the place. It was gerrymandered, and that was the work of the legislature. The legislature in 2014 put before the voters an independent redistricting commission. So they said, look, let's have independent voices do this. We won't have the cronyism in it. We'll have pretty good district lines. By the way, if you look at the congressional district lines in New York right now, after the 2010 census, the legislature couldn't agree on the congressional districts. They were drawn by a judge. I'm not advocating for that. I don't want judges doing this normally, but they actually look fairly nonpartisan. There's a Buffalo district, a Rochester one, a Syracuse one. The districts are not all the squiggly lines we used to get. At any rate, this passed in 2014, the Independent Redistricting Commission. And to override it, the legislature needs a 2/3 supermajority, and it needs to reject 2 maps. The Democrats have actually gained a supermajority in not only Assembly, but the Senate, so they could override this Independent Redistricting Commission. The commission actually came out with its initial findings a couple weeks ago. And guess what they had? They were supposed to have 1 map that was nonpartisan. Lo and behold, there was a map from the Republican commissioners and 1 from the Democrat commissioners. So the independent commission couldn't even come up with 1 single map. The Democrats in the legislature have put this before us to amend the Independent Redistricting Commission to make it from a 2/3 supermajority to just 60% to throw out the district lines, and to also say they would have to throw out 1 map. Right now we have confusion because we already have 2 maps out there, so the commission's not even doing the job that it was set out to do. The storyline of this is the House of Representatives is at stake in the next election. Out of 27 representatives in New York, believe it or not, 8 are Republican right now. Many of those are in upstate. The Democrats want to override this commission. They want to draw their own district lines. They want to put all the Republicans in 2 districts in upstate and do what they can with downstate Republicans, and have a net gain of 6 seats here in New York on their path to try to keep the majority in the House. So this is really ground zero for the 2022 election. If the Democrats get these policies passed, you might be thinking, wow, maybe we have a hope for governor now. Cuomo's out. The Democrats are going to have a primary. What's going to happen? Maybe we have some hope here. Sure, we do. But imagine Donald Trump's scenario again, or the state Senate scenario we saw last time. Everything looking good for the conservative candidate, the Republican candidate, and then massive numbers of absentees coming through. Who are they coming from? Where are they coming from? Massive numbers of new voters showing up on election day. If we're going to win in New York in 2022, we need to win in these ballot initiatives. And you might say, oh, is this going to be like normal New York votes? Upstate can come out and vote against these, but we're overridden by New York City. Think about what's going on. New York City mayor's race. Oh yeah, wasn't that crazy? Wasn't there ranked choice voting? Wasn't that during the summer? Yes. There is a Democrat nominee, there is a Republican nominee, but that race is not being heavily contested. So we don't think there's going to be a heavy turnout in New York City in this election. There have been several polls out on these issues, and they're saying 50-35. 50% in favor of absentee voting, 35% against. 50% in favor of same-day registration, 35 against. And that's without any education, any background. We think the left is just thinking, hey, we've got this, we've got this. Conservatives, Republicans, the independent-minded conservatives, they've given up here. They don't know your resolve here, that you're at this meeting here today, that you're planning for something better for our community. And if you look at the number of votes, we're looking at maybe 3.5 million votes in this election, which sounds like a lot, but you're looking at 1.8 million to win. And if you look at base voters that get out, conservatives, Republicans, independent-minded conservatives tend to be more loyal voters. So we have a great base that's going to come out, and right away as they look at these, they're going to vote no. How do we close that supposed 15-point gap in the polls? How do we pull off a big surprise in this election? I'm going all over the state and speaking to great groups like you, and I can tell, for every person in this room, there's a leader. Some of you are leading your Divide New York chapters back home. Many of you are involved in other civic groups, sportsmen's groups, Tea Party groups, Rotary, church organizations. You all have your networks. You all have your networks. And we're hoping that each one of you is worth, and I know you are worth even more than that, 10, 20, 50 votes. Get the buzz going. Things are very quiet now, but wait for the end game. We've got some time to November 2nd. We don't have the easy absentee voting in place now. We don't have a lot of people focused on this election. So it's about every single one of us in this room. Your goal here for Divide New York, our goal that's being expressed here, is going to be a lot easier if we have fair elections going forward. If we lose on these ballot initiatives, our challenge is going to be that much greater. I'd like to open up for questions. I know there are, especially the independent redistricting, it's complicated, but it's one that we'd like to defeat as well. You might ask about the environmental justice amendment here. Those that I'm working with decided not to oppose it. We live in upstate New York here. Most of us, we live here because we love the environment. There's obviously a lot of different views about environmental extremism versus what are basic things that we could do here with the environment. We feel like if we link those in with the election one, even though we do, most of the people I'm working with think the environmental policies have gone way too far, are inhibiting the rights of landowners here in New York for natural gas drilling and other things, that if we lump this in with the election votes, it would be easy to say, oh, you're against the environment, and it would make it very difficult. So we see this one passing. Polling is showing it's going to pass overwhelmingly, and I know it will perhaps make it easier for the left to put in what I would consider others extreme environmental policies, but they're doing those already anyway, so we're focusing on the three election initiatives, 1, 3, and 4. Yes?
Isn't that environmental law the one where they pass the no sales of gasoline engines after 2035?
What concerns me here is you have the base language, and I was explaining this with the absentees. You have the base language that now absentees are for any reason. After that, what's the follow-up? We're going to start mailing ballots to people. We're going to have drop boxes.
Sure.
Once you get the environmental law in, I'm sure that may open the door to other things, and people who are trying to sue for property rights, for other reasonable measures, and saying, look, this isn't a catastrophic health concern, what the New York City Democrats are doing on this environmental policy, I think it's going to make it all the more difficult. So, we don't like to lose battles here, but with this one we said, well, we're losing a lot of environmental battles right now anyway, or property rights battles. We just think that fighting on this one, we may bring momentum against other three that we really need to defeat. The future of elections in New York State is at stake here. The future of Congress is really at stake here with this commission. I don't want to give you false hope and say if we defeat provision number 1, we're going to turn back Pelosi and her minions from redrawing these district lines, because they still can overturn the independent commission that's not even functioning right now with their supermajority, and they probably will. But if we defeat number 1, we can say, look, we have seemingly 2 sets of maps that have been rejected. We have maps that we think are going to be completely crazy drawn by the Democrats. It gives us better legal ground going forward on this redistricting. So I don't want to hold false hope out on the redistricting that if we defeat this one, everything is going to be fine, but it will give us more ground, more legal standing to fight what we think are going to be just some wild maps here that are trying to put the minority party out of business, certainly. And that, I mentioned Congress, but state Senate, state Senate Republicans have very much a fighting shot. Assembly is great. You guys are partnering with a lot of great members in this body. Their seats can be in jeopardy than many others, certainly. Yes?
Yeah, the 22nd district, they found a bunch of the absentee ballots stuffed in drawers throughout the county. Would that help
Yeah, unbelievable. If you missed it, the 22nd district goes from Binghamton to Utica. It's represented by Claudia Tenney. The incumbent in the previous election was Anthony Brindisi from Utica. Tenney was up by 30,000 votes on election night, which was seemingly insurmountable in a race of this magnitude. But all these absentees kept coming in, and as many of you know, it went on for months. The election wasn't decided until February, so those living in this district, in that particular district, had no representation for some key early votes. And as you had mentioned, there was ballots showing up in Shenango County and other places. It seemed like every time we read the news, more ballots were showing up. Is absentee ballots all over the place? Is that going to help this system here? Are people showing up the same day, registering to voting? Is that going to help? Questionable ballots, and I hate to use that expression, but so much of it is the toothpaste is out of the container. Once people vote, even if they're questionable votes, judges are hesitant to throw those out because, oh, I'm disenfranchising someone. So it's better to have fair, transparent laws in place. Absentees are very important. We know there's a lot of people in nursing homes. We know there's a lot of people who are not well. They have the right to vote absentee, and they should continue to do so. We know people are serving our country in the military. We know people travel for business and are out of town. So those are legitimate absentee purposes, but to turn it into, if you look at the last presidential, the absentees in 2020 were 50% of the whole vote in 2016 across the country. So this is not a good thing for our elections. It's not fair to the candidates who want to have the debates, who want to make the case till the end. Think about, I know you ran for assembly. Think about campaigns where they don't have the money to do 2 months of advertising. You're saving up on your budget. I was, and my budget's in the last week or so, sending our mailers out here. If everyone's voting absentee, is that even worth it? I shouldn't say it's not worth it, it always is, but these are very troubling ballot initiatives up there. A lot of people don't know about it. We think the left is asleep at the switch on it. So we're hopeful, and I know we've got great leaders in this room, so I hope you rise up and continue to educate friends in these next days. Other questions? Yes?
There has to be a chain of command, like a custody on the way to these ballots, and if they can't prove that, they shouldn't, whether they want to say they're valid or not. There has to be a window of time, 24 hours or 48 hours. And if the ballots don't get there, then that's on people that were in charge of that program.
Right.
Because there's got to be a chain of command, because if nobody knows where these come from and you just found them in a desk, I'm going to say, sorry.
Look at Pennsylvania. You had the courts in Pennsylvania saying, yes, we're extending the absentee ballot line. You have to accept ballots that are coming in after the election. Even
so what's that
one
time frame? That's what I'm saying, is there's got to be a time frame that we could go after, 24 hours or 48 hours, because if we have it open-ended, that's when the problems arise as they keep extending it.
This is hopeful here that you're turning it to the voters. The voters can vote. Stephanie talked about upstate, and we're outgunned on the numbers here, but who shows up in this particular election, this is the chance for all voters to decide these issues. If these pass, then you've got these super majorities from New York City saying, oh yeah, we're going to do this with absentee law, we're going to do this with same-day voting here. It's the future of our state has been in peril for a long time. I know that's why this group is formed, but these are serious, serious issues here. So I appreciate all the time Divide New York has given me. I've had a couple meetings now, and I hope we can keep partnering, and I appreciate your efforts. I'm really admire your efforts here. Thank you so much. Last questions? Yes?
I think the quandary comes in where you'd be invalidating legitimate votes based on the performance of officials.
Yes.
And that's where the courts have a problem.
Right, in New York 22 and just nationally as well here. Yeah, you don't want to put your elections in the hands of judges, right? If you're voting election day,
It's not the judges, it's the election officials.
The election
who are
officials.
delivering the ballots in a timely manner.
right, yeah, so good point.
And then you want to invalidate, and I'm not against what you're saying, I'm just saying then you want to invalidate a legitimate vote because of the performance of an election official.
Yeah, a great point too. And look at this last election. I knew my county board of elections people really well. They weren't giving more money for staff. They weren't giving more money to handle massive numbers of absentee ballots. They had to turn around those requests, and mistakes were made. Mistakes were certainly made. Some people were sent 2 ballots.
Well, another thing
So-
is that we have is corporations like Facebook donating huge amounts of money to some of the Board of Elections. For example, where I ran in Onondaga County and was kicked off of Facebook during my campaign, including my election campaign page. I was given it back on January 20th, and which was supposed to be permanently deleted. But Mark Zuckerberg donated $280,000 to the Onondaga County Board of Elections.
Right,
Why is that happening?
right. Unbelievable. You know, again, election stores, one that stands out to me the most, and it makes me fearful for New York. New York City is a very transient place, so same-day voter registration absentees, that can really throw things off. All of our college towns, look at Nevada. Las Vegas was devastated, the casino industry during COVID. And the Trump lawsuit in Nevada said 20,000 people who are not living in the state of Nevada had voted absentee. So they were still on the rolls. And this easy absentees, hey, they just did it. It estimated 42,000 people in their lawsuit voted twice in Nevada. 92,000 was the number that I heard from others about Nevada. So again, you had all these lawsuits. I know a lot of them didn't go anywhere, but what were the facts here? The facts were a lot of absentees were floating around. There's a lot of questions here. Absentees it's hard enough to verify identity when someone comes up in the election booth that day, but if a ballot has no one overseeing it, that's where you hear the terms, ballot harvesting, certainly. Yes, sir.
I voted absentee ballot once when I was in the military. That was either 1970 or 71, because New York City wanted to secede from the state, and I voted yes, let them go.
Wow. And now look where we are here.
I love to hand me the ballot.
Yeah. I'm a history teacher. I mentioned I'm from Endicott. The state senator down there was a guy named Warren Anderson. And the Highway 88 from Binghamton to Albany is the Warren Anderson Highway. President Ford told New York City when they were filing for bankruptcy, he said, sorry, we can't help you. Warren Anderson brought together the deal to save New York City. So if Warren Anderson not saved New York City, maybe New York would have, you mentioned they were trying to divide back then, maybe New York would have divided back then, but Warren Anderson was the state senator who went against even what President Ford was saying to help out New York in that day. So, big times here, big election that no one's talking about. So stay tuned and keep the buzz going. If you get the buzz going, who knows what can happen in this election that no one's really talking about these issues right now. John, thank you. Thank you.
My name is Nancie Orticelli. I'm the president of the Constitutional Coalition of New York State, which is an organization that came into existence. We used to be Erie County SCOPE, Shooters Committee on Political Education, and we kind of imploded and decided we wanted to still continue doing things the same way Scope did, but instead of just embracing the Second Amendment, we embrace the entire Constitution. Because if you just focus on one amendment, sometimes you lose sight of the other rights that God has given us, and sometimes you compromise in order to further the one that you're trying to further. And so we decided to become an organization that embraces the entire Constitution. And when we wrote our mission statement, I'm not the first president, I'm the third, I believe, of the coalition. My vice president, Sean Lemke, is here, my daughter, Annalise, and when we first decided to write our mission statement, we wanted to be a group that didn't just meet to sit around and moan and complain and talk about the problems and say, yeah, that's not fair, that's not right, that's not constitutional, and then do nothing about it when we left the meeting. Because there's a lot of groups that do just that. They're just social clubs for people to come and gather and complain and do nothing. So what do? We educate, and then on that education, we enact some activism. I don't really have much to do with the constitutional counties, except that we support it, and this is what I know of that. It's at this point, a constitutional county is a symbolic gesture. It doesn't work unless there's teeth behind that resolution. And we know that there's a lot of things in our country that are symbolic, like the flag, the Liberty Bell, different things like that, but they stand for something and they mean something, and they give us hope and they give us resolution to do the things that we need to do. It gives us a reason to keep standing. And a constitutional county is one that ensures that it will neither enact nor enforce any laws that encroach upon the rights of citizens under the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Have anybody here ever heard of Sheriff Mack?
Yes.
Okay, Sheriff Mack is best known as being one of 7 county sheriffs who in 1994 challenged the constitutionality of the Brady Bill, which was a federal law that required a waiting period for gun purchases and reporting the sale to law enforcement for a local background check. The sheriffs did prevail on their part, where they challenged when the Supreme Court ruled state and local governments violated the 10th Amendment in performing background checks. And since then, Sheriff Mack has formed a group called the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association. What they do is they educate county sheriffs about their responsibility towards the public, namely to defend them from any encroachment upon their rights as the highest law enforcement officer in the county. And that right there is the key to a constitutional county. Your board can pass a resolution all day long, and they can say this county is now a constitutional county. But until you get the sheriff on board to put teeth behind what the resolution says, it's just a symbolic gesture. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's a good thing to do because it's a step in the right direction. And then if you live in a county where you're trying to convince your board to be a constitutional county, you need to then reach out to your sheriff and get your sheriff on board with that, because this is what is said on Sheriff Mack's website. The vertical separation of powers in the Constitution makes it clear that the power of the sheriff supersedes the power of the president. Do you hear what I said? The powers of the sheriff supersedes the power of the president, and that's a fact. A constitutional sheriff is the highest held position in your county as far as law enforcement goes, even above the president. So if you get your sheriff to back up your town board and your resolution, and you say, we are a constitutional county in Chautauqua County, they just passed that. If they get their sheriff on board to do that, and then the government comes in and tries to say, force your children in schools to be vaccinated, or force employees or a business with over 100 people to be vaccinated, the sheriff can come in and say, absolutely not. That is not happening here. He can go to different businesses, your schools, and say, nope, absolutely not. The town board and the sheriff are in agreement, and that's not happening. That's how a constitutional county happens. You start out with the resolution or start out with the sheriff, but either way, you got to get both on board. And what Chautauqua County did, and a lot of counties have done, is a step in the right direction. And then you do that, and you can start bringing, keep on with the divide meetings. Keep on. I know Diana Thorne in Erie County is doing a smash-up job. She's doing an amazing job getting people to different town boards and asking them to do resolutions for Divide. Haven't seen this much movement in Erie County for Divide in a long time, and she's doing the job, and that is a step in the right direction. You do that, you get on your boards to divide, to be a constitutional city, town, county, get your sheriffs on board, it can be done. But, like I started out saying in encouragement, you can't give up, and I'm here to encourage you. I know, like this lady just said, you're here because you're not giving up. Absolutely, that's obvious because you're here. I'm encouraging you because guess what? Some days you are going to feel like giving up. Some days you are going to feel like nobody's listening to you. I know I feel that daily and weekly in the stuff that I do. I would love it if somebody came to my group and encouraged me. I'd never call them out for it. I'd say, thank you for the encouragement. Thank you for driving almost 3 hours here to speak to us. And that is how we stick together. Not by tearing each other down. Not by getting upset. But by saying, you've got this and you can do this and we are with you. And not only are we with you, the Constitution is on your side. And as such, God is on your side. Because one of our goals and our mottos in our group is if God's not in it, we don't want anything to do with it. So we say, if God is for us, who can be against us? So, the resolutions, in essence, tell your constitutional sheriff that the town has their back if the sheriff decides to truly stand for the constitutional resolution of the people. Your sheriff says, yes, I'm Sheriff Nancie Orticelli, and I tell you right now that I'm going to be constitutional. I'm not going to enforce the SAFE Act. I'm not going to enforce and mandate jabs. And then the town says, yes, we're passing this resolution, and we are coming behind you, and we've got your back. That's how you get a constitutional county. I listened to a teacher this morning on YouTube from the Chautauqua County School Board meeting, Angela Bittinger. Has anyone seen that video? She's a history teacher, and she was amazing. And she said, if you trust your government, your history teacher did not do their job. And I know this gentleman back here is a history teacher, so I hope your students don't trust the government. I'm sure you're a great teacher. But I want to end with this. The cost of liberty is never free. One of the principles found in the Declaration of Independence is the fact that a government must receive its power to rule from the people, and the people have the right to abolish a tyrannical government. Quote, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. That is exactly what you ladies and gentlemen here in Divide are doing. And you owe yourselves a hand because you see that the government is tyrannical and you have the absolute right to abolish it and establish a new government by separating into 3 autonomous regions, and you guys are doing it, and I love that. So how did the colonists do this back in the Revolutionary War? Number 1, they first tried to stand peacefully. They tried for years. They tried to work with the British, sending petitions and letters, etc. How many of us have signed petitions and sent letters? They did the same thing, informing the British of their rights. They tried boycotts. And then when every method failed and abuses became unbearable, they resorted to armed conflict. I'm not saying to do that. I'm just saying that's what they did. How can people resist tyranny as a last resort if their right to bear arms is taken from them? We have been on a slippery slope in New York State for a long time. It didn't just start with 2013 when the SAFE Act was enacted, but that was one of the biggest things that showed us that we are on a slippery slope to tyranny. And we're getting to the point where the abuses are almost unbearable. We were just locked down for a year and a half, and nobody did anything about it. There were a handful of people who said, I will not wear a mask, I will not consent, I will not comply. And now, as we're going along in this year, it's getting more and more unbearable because now they want to inject you and your children with chemicals that you do not consent to. If you do, great. If you want to get a vaccination, great. That is your right. But for me, I should have that right to not to. And I shouldn't have to give you statistics as to why I don't want to just because I say no is enough.
That's right.
And once we start standing up together and not tearing each other down and not criticizing each other for why we came to speak at an event, but said, you know what, we're going to get behind each other and we're going to work alongside each other, and to hell with these petty arguments. Let's stop the tyrannical government that is trying to become a communist state in New York and say enough's enough just because I say no. I do not consent individually. You have no right to do this to me, and for that reason alone, I would like to divide from the city and have 3 autonomous regions. Keep saying reasons. The price for freedom. The signers of the Declaration of Independence were merchants, businessmen, lawyers, sailors, judges, doctors, farmers, ministers, and they all paid a price for signing the Declaration of Independence. What is one thing you can do this week to take a stand and sacrifice and say that you fought for freedom? It's not as hard as it sounds. Being here today is one of those things. Kudos to you all. You guys know who Joan of Arc was? She was a young girl who changed the history of her country. She was a teenage girl, she was poor, she had no military training, she wasn't a teacher, she didn't run for office, she just believed in freedom and believed in her cause. She said this just before she was martyred, burned at the stake. Every man gives his life for what he believes. Every woman gives her life for what she believes. Sometimes people believe in little or nothing, and so give their lives to little or nothing. One life is all we have, and we live it as we believe in living it, and then it's gone. But to surrender who you are and to live without belief is more terrible than dying, and even more terrible than dying young. Joan of Arc was called upon God to save her countries from its enemies. She swept her enemies before her, and she sent a thrill of enthusiasm through the French army such as neither king nor statesman could produce. Listen to me. She sent a thrill of enthusiasm. She was an encourager. If she would have been invited to speak somewhere, I'm sure she would have went, whether she volunteered for that organization or not. Because she was there to encourage and to uplift people. She sent a thrill of enthusiasm through the French army such as neither king nor statesman could produce. On one occasion, she said to one of her generals, "I'm going to lead the men over this wall." The general said, "Not one man will follow you." And Joan said, "Guess what? I'm not going to look back to see whether anyone's following me or not." Move forward regardless of petty jealousies or egos, or you don't agree with this or agree with that. Just move forward with your mission. The soldiers of France did follow her, and that kind of devotion and commitment can not only exist in a teenager of the 15th century, but it could exist in a 45-year-old woman, or a 70-year-old man, or a veteran from the 70s. That same spirit can exist in each and every one of us. But let's move on with the cause. Don't give up with divide. You guys are awesome. Thanks for having me here today.
Okay, as I said earlier, the slide projector is not working, so I will try to wing this without slides. What I'm trying to do is explain exactly how autonomous regions work, so everybody understands what we're talking about and why we're trying to do it this way. Basically, I don't know how many people know this, but the idea of dividing New York State is 150 years old, maybe 160 now. But what has happened over the years is it's always been blocked by Congress feeding back to the legislature they would not approve it, because the western states feel that the Northeast has too many senators because of New England, having 6 states in an area that out west would only be 2 states. So that's basically where we've stood for the last 150 years. So we did a lot of research on it before this organization was formed in 2015. And what we discovered was we can divide the state constitutionally and legally into autonomous regions and give most of the power to the regions as opposed to the state government having the power. What we've discovered is we are not required to have common law. In fact, one state does not, Louisiana. It is a tradition that 49 states have observed But we can separate it out so each region has common law instead. And that's where it comes from. If you look at the front page of our handouts for the slides here, basically it outlines several of our problems. If I wanted to include all the problems that have been caused here, I'd need like 20 pages of paper, so we tried to just highlight a few of them. But a lot of them are the unfunded mandates that are, the state wants to spend money, but it doesn't want to raise state taxes. So what it does is it requires the county or local government or school district to do the job for them. That is actually a state job. So in doing that, they dump more and more. In most counties, in my own county, Albany County, the entire property tax and 2% of the 4% sales tax goes to unfunded mandates. The county operates on a 2% sales tax. Some counties are a little better, some are a little worse, but it basically works out. When you see your property tax bill for counties, most of that county property tax bill is going to pay for unfunded state mandates that the state legislature said the county shall pay for. It goes from, the one that comes up a lot is Medicare, but what we also forget about is they also have to pay for community college education. There's the list of unfunded mandates is so large we could not get a list of them when we did our search, because it is buried in every state law. And you would have to scan the entire encyclopedia length of New York state laws to find them all. Some of them may not even be observed because everybody forgot about them. But most of the big ones are, and it costs us an awful lot of money. And that's why we're in the situation we are now. Now, the legislature currently is controlled from downstate. It has been ever since the one-man, one-vote ruling back in the 1970s. Prior to that, the New York State Senate had geographic districts, and the assembly was by population. Every other state except Nebraska, their Senate had one senator per county. But New York, we like to do things a little differently. We had geographic districts that were multi-county, but they didn't change. So upstate controlled the Senate, downstate usually controlled the assembly and the governor's office. Once that one-man, one-vote ruling took effect, everything had to be either based on population, the districts had to be equal, or they have to be weighted vote. A lot of counties with boards of supervisors have the weighted vote things, where if your town has 500 people, that supervisor gets 500 votes. A town with 600 people, that supervisor gets 600 votes, and so far. But basically, that's how we came up with this. Now, there are a lot of laws we don't like. We have groups in New York City that want to separate. They want to get rid of us for different reasons than we want to get rid of them. That's why we're officially neutral on the SAFE Act, because the group in New York City likes it and wants to make it stronger, and a lot of people upstate want to get rid of it. So it's a catch-22 there, but it would work out for everybody because each region could do its own laws. Now, once the legislature's in power, the amendment calls for the laws to be deleted from the state code and become regional laws, except those that are required by the U.S. Constitution to remain at the state level. So all the laws like SAFE Act and all the unfunded mandates would become regional laws. And we have a clause in there that says any unfunded mandate has to be reenacted by a 60% vote and the like. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. But if you come over to slide B on your handouts, our succession plan calls for a more Republican government. That doesn't mean Republican Party, because that question always comes up. What it means is it's under law. You have certain rights that can't be taken away from you. The problem with the New York State Constitution is when it was modified by the one-man, one-vote rule, we became a pure democracy as opposed to a republic. And that's why a lot of our problems exist now. What happened is when you amend the state constitution, you had to be passed by two separately elected legislators, and it used to be one was apportioned by geographically, and one was apportioned by population, and then it went to the voters. Well, now both the Senate and Assembly are apportioned by population. So it takes a majority, simple majority vote to amend the Constitution. They just have to vote twice with an election in between. And then you have a situation where it goes to the voters. So a simple majority of the voters. It doesn't even require a 2/3 vote of the voters. In doing that, we become a democracy, a pure democracy, which is basically mob rule. Whatever the majority wants at the time, it can get. We had the earlier speaker about amendments to the Constitution where they're trying to impose permanent majority rule on everything, which hurts minority rights. Now, if you glance through the writing here, the regions would be fully autonomous. They make their own laws, set their own things, and the like. The token state government we would create would be kept small by limiting its taxing power to 3% of a sales tax. No, all the taxing powers go to the state, so you can't have government creep on the token state level because it has no money. And the one thing that can stop government from growing is not having money and no way to tax to get more. So that would weaken the state government and give the power to the regions. And it should make most people very happy because the New York region wants certain things that still get blocked whenever the people that would be in the Montauk region and upstate get together. We have a slight majority over the New York City region, so we can actually block things when that happens. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen enough that they don't like it. Plus, some things they really care about that run at the state level now that will drive them crazy often is the MTA, which has not been properly managed by the state for many years, and that's why they have all the problems. They got funding during the last hurricane for pumps to pump the subway dry, and they're still sitting in a warehouse, most of them not installed. So when the last hurricane hit, they got flooded out again. And they never installed the mats. It's so basic and so stupid, it's unbelievable. Because they have all those air vents in New York City. If you've ever been on Manhattan Street, you know the air vents for the subway, and if you stand on them, the air will come up. A famous movie used it for something many years ago too. But in any event, what they used to do is they had rubber mats. If you were having a heavy rainstorm like a hurricane or whatever, you'd put the rubber mat over the air vent so the rain wouldn't come in and flood out the subway. They don't have any rubber mats anymore. None of this is rocket science. It's all really basic stuff. And it's because the state now controls the subway, but the city controls the sidewalk. But in any event, we're getting more to... Now, how we could set this up if you go over to slide C in your handouts? It lists this type of laws that would remain at the state level because they have to. The others would become regional laws. And if you can see, 3/4 of the laws of New York State will become regional laws. We have a list here. The law titles are taken from the state legal code, which I'm surprised a couple of the titles are not politically correct by today's standards, but that's the title in the state code, so it has to be written that way. What would happen is regional senators will be elected from their regional district, and regional assemblymen would be elected from the regional assembly's district, but they will meet together 6 weeks a year for as the state legislature, with their votes weighted by their district size, which complies with the one-man, one-vote ruling. But they would have very little to do because they have no money, the state legislature has no money for a budget, and most of the laws it wants to enact, it can't enact. Because part of the clause is regional laws shall be supreme over state laws, instead of the other way around. And it also includes here some technical information on when the fiscal years were and stuff, if you're interested in that. I don't know how many people are or not, so I'll skip over that. Now, the next slide, D, has the who, what, where, why, when and stuff of it, outlined as shortly, as smallly as we can. Each region gets its own elected regional governor and its own elected regional lieutenant governor. And we also elect a regional secretary of state. The regional governor appoints most officials, including the Department of Education commissioner for the region. And the reason for that is currently the education there is actually appointed by the Assembly Speaker, indirectly. They control the election. The Assembly has more members than the Senate, so they control the election of Board of Regents members. And the Board of Regents members pick the Education Commissioner. So the governor actually doesn't have any power over the Education Committee other than recommending a budget to them. And the legislature can override that recommendation. So basically the Education Commissioner is the only one in the whole thing that is so removed from anybody but the Assembly Speaker that the Assembly Speaker basically controls the Education Committee. Now, when we divide a state, it has a lot of things, and how many here are familiar with the Staten Island vote? Nobody? Okay, I'll outline that a little bit. Staten Island back in 1995, 60% of the voters voted to leave New York City and form their own city. So then the bill ratifying the vote was introduced in the state legislature. It's still in committee. I think this year they gave up reintroducing it. But it was in committee all those years to ratify the vote on Staten Island. Because once a vote was taken like that under the New York State Constitution, it doesn't expire. You can make use of it at any time. But probably now, after this many years, you probably should have another vote. But in any event, so when we discovered that, the amendment is now 20 pages in the state legislature. And defines exactly how everything would be divided, who decides how things are divided, and how the laws are transferred. So it requires absolutely no implementation legislation from the state legislature at all. Once it's ratified for the voters, it takes effect 1.5 years later. Now, in doing that, we also defined how the employees are transferred from their state jobs to regional jobs, which should eliminate any opposition to it, because nobody's going to lose a job over this. And the state pension system remains at the token state government level unchanged, so it doesn't affect any pension systems. And the New York and Montauk regions, if they have students that want to go to SUNY upstate, they still can, and the region would have to pay for it, and vice versa. What we did with the prison system is a lot of the prisoners are from downstate, but most of the prisons are in upstate. So how we handled that was New Amsterdam region, which was the name we had picked for upstate, would get 2 prisons for males and 1 for females. All the rest of the prisons become owned by either Montauk or the New York region, even though they're in upstate, and they would be taken over that way. And the employees would be simply transferred to the prison that they work for that particular region government as a regional employee. And the prisoners, they have 2 years to transfer them to a prison owned by the regional government that they committed their crime in. So we covered all that so there won't be a big outcry against it. Now, it doesn't affect local government ownership rights, so the city of New York's water system is not affected at all. They still have it, they own it, they still have to pay taxes on it to the local government, just as they do now. what we also did is most of the powers of the New York State Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York. For those of you who don't know, for some reason the Supreme Court in New York is only a trial court, and the New York State Court of Appeals is the highest court, what they call Supreme Court in other states. Most of its powers will be transferred to regional superior courts in each region. So we would have a court interpreting all our laws. But since we have to have, under the U.S. Constitution, one common court, the Court of Appeals would remain, and there's a formula in there on how they would handle appeals from regional superior courts. Now, one of our major problems is the schools tax formula and the school reimbursement formula. And anybody who's ever paid their tax bill and doesn't escrow it through a mortgage company knows the school taxes are out of control here. The school tax formula is one of the strangest laws. If you ever have time to read it, you'll ever read in your life, if you can stay awake reading it. Because it has all these clauses in there, and for what I've been told talking to people who work for the education department, for the most part they take their best guess on how much aid a school district could get based on the formula, but even they are not certain how the formula works in a lot of cases, because there's so many provisos, and unless a school district happens to know a certain clause applies to them and brings up a challenge, whatever the guess the education department gives them is how much money they get. It's basically doesn't work because it tries to put everything into one thing. It takes rural districts, upstate districts, downstate districts, and puts them all together. And then it uses a wealth manner using zip codes, but only 5-digit zip codes. So technically, school districts in Enfield, which has an Ithaca address, are in the formula for Ithaca. And that formula is being applied to your wealth to see how much aid you should get. Sometimes they adjust it if the school district complains, but if the school district does not complain, it will not be adjusted. So, because what they do is, depending on how wealthy an area is, that determines how much aid you don't get from the state. But the boundary is a lot of things, and a lot of districts, since they do not have to conform with state, city, or town boundaries, are thrown off on that because the schools in Enfield have an Ithaca mailing address. Some of the people who fill out their taxes will list Ithaca, and if you don't have kids in school, you may not write the right school district on there, or you may write the wrong one, or whatever, and it throws the whole formula off. And you would think, now that you have computers and you don't have to do it manually anymore, they would have corrected it, but they have not. This would allow the regions to correct the formula so our schools could be positively funded. Massachusetts has nice schools, Pennsylvania has nice schools, Vermont has nice schools, and all of them, their property taxes are like 1/3 of ours. So we're not getting better schools for it. I don't know where the money goes. A lot of it might be going to unfunded mandates that aren't educator related that school districts have to cover, but that's another issue that we'll cover a little later. Now, how you can help. This is the important. New York State's Constitution does not have a right of petition for its people. I'm not sure, we might be the only state that has that clause, but it does have a right of petition for its municipalities. Don't ask me why, but that's the way it's set up. Now, the Home Rule Resolution, if a county, town, city, village passes a Home Rule Resolution saying they want a certain law passed, or they just cite the bill number, since this isn't introduced, they just have to cite the bill numbers, and sends that to the legislatures that represent that county, town, or the legislator is obligated to introduce it or co-sponsor it. They're not obligated to vote for it, but they are. And I haven't been able to figure out what the term obligated means means legally, but that's basically, they're not required to, they're obligated to. It's a slight difference, but it's the best we've got. So if enough counties, towns, and cities start to support this and pass resolutions, they can put pressure on their legislators to co-sponsor. And that eventually, that's the only thing we have. Once we get a majority of co-sponsors in either house, the bill can be forced to the floor. It only happens occasionally because it's very rare you get a majority of co-sponsors on a bill, but if you do, it can be forced to the floor. There's a lot of other issues related to this, but I'll get into them in a minute. Now, I accidentally skipped slide F, and I apologize for that. That outlines the two methods of amending the state constitution that are available to us. The first one is a constitutional convention. Every 20 years we get to vote on whether they have one or not. It was voted down in 2017. The next vote for it to occur is 2037. The legislature can call one at any time, but they haven't done that in over 70 years. That's where we get the controversy on those a lot, because what happens is when they called it on their own, they called it on an on-cycle year, an off-cycle year, I should say. So that'll allow legislators to run for convention delegate. Normally, if the people call it, the election of delegates occurs at the same time as the legislators, and that prohibits them from running for both offices at the same time. So we're going with option number 2, which is the legislature by a simple majority vote passes the amendment twice with an election of legislators in between, and then it goes to the voters. So if we were to get it to pass in the lame duck session because there's some pressure on them brought to bear to pass it, and it would pass again in 2023, it would go to the voters in 2023. If it didn't pass until 2023, it couldn't go to the voters until 2025, and that's how it works. So it always takes at least 2 years to get an amendment to the voters. Sometimes, depending on when the vote is taken, it takes 3. Now, our ending on this thing here is how to contact your assemblyman and senator and ask them to co-sponsor the bill. I'm sure they didn't want to hear from you if they already are a sponsor or co-sponsor of the bill, just to reassure them that they're doing the right thing. But that's how to contact them. I have the website links here and the like. What I'll do now is I'll open the floor to questions of myself or any of the other officers that are here that people want. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can from here, and then I'll turn it over to the whole floor. So are there any questions from the floor? That's unusual. I usually get not loud.
I know I gotta get busy.
Are you guys in any groups, like Second Amendment groups? Huh?
You know who I'm gonna talk to?
Good man. There you go. What county are you in?
Tioga County.
Tioga?
Yeah. Bob Howard, he's big on the Second Amendment. He has his own Barrett 50 cal.
Nice. Are you
And
in?
because I'm a councilman for Spencer, and I do know about home rule,
Good.
I'm gonna be working with our town board.
Well, if you're able to get that on the calendar, one of us in the board will come to help you answer the challenging questions that they might have.
I'm the biggest pain in the ass in the town board.
Don?
I have a question about the, as far as presidential elections. Right now, New York State is a winner takes all state as far as their electoral votes. what's in our plan?
I would hope that the law could, that is controlled by New York, under the U.S. Constitution, that's controlled by state statute,
Yep.
not state constitution. So maybe it can be controlled by state constitution, but that is not, our purpose was to have an amendment that could pass without any federal review at all. So we don't address any federal issues in the amendment, except that it says no more than 2 congressional districts can cross a regional line when they're drawn the next time. Under the
Because I know an awful lot of people who want,
Oh, I
when it
agree.
comes to this topic, if we're going to split from New York City, and literally it's going to be a population-wise about a 50-50 split. I mean, we're racing to the bottom here to see who can drain their population, but at least if we can get rid of the winner takes all and go to a fair, equitable, split on
Well,
the electoral votes.
I suspect that would have to be a Supreme Court ruling. They recently rejected a case from California where they were challenging the winner-take-all in California as a grounds that it violates one man, one vote ruling from the past, and the Supreme Court declined to hear it. So until they're willing to hear a case like that, I don't see it happening. 48 states have winner-take-all. It's Maine and I think Nebraska that do not. They elect them by a congressional district and 2 at large, because you get a total of your total representatives in Congress and a total of your senators is the number of electoral votes you get. That's why a small state like Vermont gets 3, because it gets 2 for its senators and 1 for the congressional district, which in Vermont is the whole state. Yeah, I've always supported that. I would love it, but it is not in the amendment because our purpose was to make sure there was no federal review required of the amendment.
Well, I can tell you this. This is going to be a huge selling point as far as this is concerned.
Oh, it would be.
And also, the split of senators in our state.
I would love to do that too. That would be unconstitutional.
Right.
Senators must be elected at large at the state level, and we're forming regions. So we're stuck on that. The presidential one would be very popular here, but the problem is we also need New York City votes for this to become law. So even though I would love it to happen,
Well, there is absolutely nothing that speaks to your representation better than those 2 topics.
I agree, but we wanted to get it through without congressional approval and to make it a state-only issue, and that's why we left out anything about the feds. The only thing we said is on the drawing of congressional districts, we can get away with that. Only 2 could cross a district line, so they won't be gerrymandering them all over every region. Because you can, in the U.S. Constitution, have clauses in your state constitution that make districts concise. That's upheld.